TCU is fortunate indeed to have Bob Schieffer as a big part of our alumni group. He blesses us with many things every year, but one of the best things Bob does for us is every year he brings a world-class panelist of experts to us to talk about various issues out there in the media. Every year we think it can't get better, and every year it does. Tonight we have a most distinguished panel. We have White House correspondents from 3 major broadcast networks and the founding editor of POLITICO. They're going to examine the 2012 presidential campaign with laser focus. Bob is uniquely qualified, of course, to lead this discussion. He has a perspective of 55 years of reporting, yet he's still moving ahead full speed. To mention just a few of his endeavors, he's moderator of Face the Nation, and we all know that, but that recently went to a 1-hour format, in fact, just a week ago. His broadcast was #1 in the ratings, beating all other Sunday news programs, so we were all excited about that. Just a little anecdote here. I was teasing him about this earlier. To tell you how fast Bob moves, I texted him during the newscast on Sunday morning with just a comment on somebody said, thinking, oh, he'll get this at 8 o'clock at night, and then he'll throw it out. He responded to me before the show was over. And I'm like, this guy, he's amazing. He's like a 20-year-old kid. I love it. Bob has also been CBS News chief Washington correspondent. He's also the former anchor of CBS Evening News. And of course, we're proud to say he's the namesake for the Schieffer School of Journalism. I'd also like to thank you. I'd also like to mention a relatively newer program we have called the Schieffer Semester in Washington, D.C., which provides internships for our students in a variety of critical organizations around the Capitol, and he's been instrumental in that. And he also leads a series of monthly dialogues that he moderates. They're presented by TCU and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I've been to a couple of those. They're amazing. They're in Washington, D.C., and he just sits down basically in a living room and has a conversation with 2 or 3 world leaders. It's just amazing. We're also proud that 2 Schieffers graduated from TCU. Of course, my favorite Schieffer, because she's my boss, is Pat Schieffer. Pat is on our board of trustees and is a longtime supporter of the university. And both Bob and Pat have been vital to the life of TCU. Now I'd like you to help me in welcoming Dr. Bob Schieffer.
Dr. Bob.
Thank you all.
You call him Dr. Bob.
Thank you. You know, this is such a great thing. Thank you all for coming. I'm always amazed. We fill this place up every time. This is the 8th one of these. It was 8 years ago, and I don't know, some of you were there for that first one. We had Tom Brokaw and Tom Friedman of the New York Times and Bob Woodward, the great Watergate reporter, and Jim Lehrer, and we just sat down and talked about the news, and everybody thought it was kind of interesting, so we decided to do it every year. And we've managed to put together, we have a panel, and we've put together, I think, a really great panel this year, because here we are in the middle of this presidential campaign, and we're going to talk to the reporters who are covering it this year, the ones who are out there on the front line. I would start by introducing John Harris. John Harris worked at the Washington Post for 31 years. He was a White House correspondent. He covered all the beats. And then in 2006, he and a guy named Jim Vanderhyde from the Washington Post founded something called POLITICO, which was a political website devoted only to political news. Now, I used to, when I'd get up in the morning, there was a certain newspaper that I turned to. That was the first place I turned to get news about politics. I won't tell you, it's still a great newspaper, so I won't tell you the name of it. But I will say that now the place that I turn, and most people who cover politics turn to get political news, is POLITICO. So, John Harris, come out here.
Thank you, Bob. Very nice. Thank you.
One of the great reporters and one of the toughest and feistiest and never give up reporters that I know is Jake Tapper of ABC News. Jake, he did a lot better in college than I did. I always say I didn't graduate, magna cum laude at TCU. I graduated, thank you, laude at TCU. But I got that degree and I got out of here before they took it away from me. Jake went to Dartmouth and he was a Phi Beta Kappa there. He came along, worked for Salon, which was one of the earliest of the internet sites that covered politics. In 2008, he was the lead political reporter for ABC, went on to be their White House correspondent, where he has done a great job. Jake Tapper. Chuck Todd of NBC is not only the White House correspondent for NBC, but he also runs all of their political coverage. He is the political director for NBC News. For 15 years, he worked at something called the Hotline, which was the kind of precursor to the internet and all of these websites that talk about politics. They basically started with scissors, and they would subscribe to all the out-of-town newspapers, and then they'd get them every morning, clip the newspapers, and then put out this clip service to tell people in Washington what newspapers and television was saying all over the country. They built it into quite a business. It is still thriving. Chuck went on to become political director at NBC, and he's with us tonight. Somebody who knows just about as much about politics as anybody I know, Chuck Todd. And last but certainly not least, native of San Antonio, she was a military brat. She grew up in San Antonio, went to Georgetown, where she met her husband, who was a kid, I think, working in the school cafeteria. He went on to become one of Washington's best-known chefs and owns 5 restaurants in Washington. We call him Chef Jeff. That's the name of his restaurant. So, Jeff, where are you? Stand up. He's right here. If you want to eat when you come to Washington, eat at one of Jeff's restaurants. He'll take good care of you. The woman who does not have to cook at home is Norah O'Donnell. Norah started working at Roll Call, a newspaper that covered Capitol Hill. She was at NBC for 12 years. I first met her on the 2000 campaign when she was covering John McCain. Last year, she came over to work for us at CBS, and when I'm not there, she sits in for me on Face the Nation, which is the reason I don't try to be away too much. She's really, really good. My good buddy, Norah O'Donnell. So I thought we would just start out talking about the latest news in politics. And of course, the latest news is that Rick Santorum dropped out of the race yesterday. So I would just like to start with Chuck and John. Why don't the two of you where do you think the race is now? And where does it go from here?
Well, we're in the middle of a general election, obviously. It started, in many ways, the Obama campaign has started the general election probably a year ago and intensively 6 months ago, but they've certainly decided that it's over now, and they're in full-fledged, do everything they can to tear Romney down at this point. And I think the Romney campaign is finally able to try to figure out how to get itself into general election mode. They start off behind, but I think that when you look at where things are, the question is where is Romney in sort of recent history of other presidential candidates? I think he's a little bit ahead of where Bill Clinton was at this point in time after his rough primary, but he's probably behind where John Kerry was at this point in time, probably behind where Bob Dole was at this point in time. And so, does that give you any context? Does that tell you that guarantees that Romney can't win or he's going to be behind? I mean, no. I think especially when you look at the Bill Clinton scenario, you can see that he certainly has a chance. It's going to be a very close election. I think it's going to be a very negative election. I think it's going to be an election where turnout is down, not up. And I think it's going to be, decided in one of those. There's a chance it could tip one way or the other, but I think both parties we're in such a polarized environment, and both parties sort of mechanically have never been more even, sort of financially or even on the ground. Each has its own advantages compared to the other party, but you throw all that together, and I think you're going to have a close election. And I think if Obama wins, it's because he's made the election about Mitt Romney. And if Mitt Romney wins, it's because he's made it a referendum on the economy. And I think it's sort of that simple.
John, what do you think each side, how will they frame this election?
Well, I think, Bob, the most urgent task for Mitt Romney, now having wrapped up this nomination, took a while longer than he was hoping, but he did it. But the most urgent task is for him to regain control of his public image. I don't think that Mitt Romney will be in a position to make his argument on the economy and managerial and executive competence unless he can persuade more people to view him sympathetically. I think this has probably always been true of politics, but it's especially true of modern politics with so much media intensity, so much sort of politics as warfare in terms of how campaigns are conducted, that the great challenge is to keep your public image and prevent the other side from sort of recasting your public image. What I mean by that is getting people to view you as you view yourself on your terms, as opposed to the opposite. Mitt Romney lost control, or has come perilously close to losing control of his public image during the course of his election, of the primary season. When you lose control of your public image, what happens is all the things that you think are your great strengths, your assets, somehow become liabilities, and you're not even recognizable to yourself. A case study in this is John Kerry in 2004, okay? Public servant, been the Senate for years, career politician, war hero, inflated his military record and is politicizing his Vietnam services. A serious, dignified man. He's a stiff, he's an elitist, he's out of touch. He lost control of his public image. I see Mitt Romney in a similar thing. He thought he was going to run, one of his big assets was like managerial competence. I'm a businessman. He's now seen as somebody who's out of touch, whose business career was really all about laying people off and being indifferent to the human consequences. And he's seen as a totally expedient figure by many people, including a lot of Republicans who have resigned themselves to the fact that he's their nominee. So he's got to reframe that, recapture his public image.
What they will do is the Romney people will try to frame this election, first and foremost, is basically a referendum on Barack Obama,
right,
who they will try to picture as a failed president, someone who promised things and was unable to keep those
correct
promises. The Democrats, it seems to me, will try to frame it as something about fairness. And they will try to picture Mitt Romney as someone totally out of touch. I thought it was quite interesting. Week before last, I interviewed the vice president, and he 4 different times talked about Romney being out of touch. I don't think that was.
Well, they ought to stop calling it the Buffett
accident.
rule. They ought to call it the Romney. The only reason they're pushing this is because they know that Mitt Romney pays in their minds to the minds of some swing voters that happen to live in the states of Ohio, Iowa, and Wisconsin, that pays an unfair tax rate. Here's this guy, didn't earn any money, and look at how low of a tax rate. The whole reason they're pushing this is because they think it individually makes Romney look out of touch.
And the Senate is actually calling it the FAIR Act. And so pushing this idea of fairness and the idea that what Mitt Romney is going to do is not going to be fair for this country. And I think, John, you bring up a great point about how do you see these two candidates? Mitt Romney will win this election if he can control his image and control the debate, make it a referendum on President Obama, and it's about the economy and the deficit. That's about the only places in poll numbers that Mitt Romney scores well, deficit and the economy. The unemployment rate has been above 8% for the past 35 months. No president since FDR has won re-election with unemployment above 7.2%. There's a lot of ground for Mitt Romney to make on talking about the economy and the deficit. But President Obama is making this an issue about fairness and that Mitt Romney's out of touch. And Mitt Romney has been sort of handing Barack Obama opportunity after opportunity to make fun of him. When he's talked about his wife having a couple of Cadillacs, the recent focus is on that he has a car elevator in his new house out in California, that he earned $360,000 in speaking fees last year. He said, but that wasn't very much money. So Romney seems to be handing the Democrats multiple opportunities for them to mock him on this very point that he is out of touch. And the John Kerry analogy is a great one, because I remember I actually covered the Bush White House as well, and I remember sitting down and having a conversation with the top Bush advisor, and I said, how are you going to run against John Kerry? I mean, this guy is a war hero. He fought in Vietnam. There's pictures of him testifying before Congress. How are you going to run it? And this advisor said to me, here is a pie chart. Only about a little sliver, 25% of the American people have made up their mind about John Kerry. We're going to tell the other 75 what to think about John Kerry. And that was the goal that they set early on, and to label him as a flip-flopper and all the things they did with John Kerry. With Mitt Romney, a lot of the electorate has already made impressions about Mitt Romney. And what Chuck was talking about, where does Mitt Romney place in terms of all of these other candidates, Mitt Romney has higher negatives than just about any other recent nominee other than Bill Clinton.
Well, Clinton was the only one that started out for.
Clinton was the only one that had a little bit higher negatives than Mitt Romney does now starting this election. That was because Bill Clinton had just come out of the whole Jennifer Flowers and an affair scandal. And that's a really important data point that people look at, certainly people in the White House look at, to say, you already have more than 40% of the American people have very negative opinions about Mitt Romney, and that's a hard thing for a new candidate on the stage to try and reshape his biography before the American people.
Jake, how did the people over at the White House, you're over there every day, how did they feel about the Republican primary? You know, you would hear Republicans say on camera, this is really going to strengthen us and toughen us up, and this is good. Did the people at the White House, did they think it helped the Republicans, or did they want it to go on and on and on?
No, I think they would have liked for it to have gone on and on and on. The Republican primary was built the way it was by the previous RNC chair, Michael Steele, precisely for that reason, to strengthen the candidate in the way that Obama was strengthened by his long primary against Secretary Clinton. But no, this one has been bad, as others have pointed out. His Mitt Romney's negatives are very high. I think I think they can turn that around. It is still very, Romney's people can still turn it around. I think I might be a little bit more bullish on Romney's chances than a lot of others. The way that they look at this election is, if John McCain won 47% of the vote, Barack Obama won 53. Barack Obama is never going to do better than 53% of the vote. And Mitt Romney is never going to do worse than 47. So they're fighting about this 6%, 3 or 4 million people. What they have to do, the Romney people, is convince the 3 or 4 million Americans who voted for Obama that it's okay to not vote for him this time. He didn't work out. And so I think you're going to hear much more of a disappointed tone from Mitt Romney. You heard it in his announcement in New Hampshire. He talked about how we did something quintessentially American. We gave a new guy a chance. And the tone you're going to hear from Mitt Romney, I think, is it's okay to like Barack Obama. It's okay that you voted for him once before. But he hasn't succeeded. And we need to come to terms with that. On the other hand, I think what you're going to hear from the Obama, and this is not to say the Romney people aren't going to be nasty and negative, but I think in terms of what you're going to hear from Romney, that's the tone. What you're going to hear from the Obama people, I think, is disdain, the kind of mockery that we saw the Bush people treat John Kerry with. Because when you have an unpopular incumbent, most Americans, I haven't checked at the daily tracking, but Obama's approval rating is usually 50%, maybe a little bit below, maybe a little bit above, but it's never going to skyrocket, I don't think. The only thing you can do is make the other guy so unacceptable that people who even don't approve of the incumbent's position go in there and vote for him. George W. Bush, I think the last approval rating he had before the Kerry election was 49%. That means people who didn't think he was doing a good job voted for him. So I think that those are the two competing narratives. We're going to hear a disdain from Obama and Democrats, and a disappointment from Mitt Romney.
Well, Romney has to do this because of this likability issue. You saw it a little outsized, I think. I thought it was a little outsized in the Washington Post poll. It was 3-1, the likability, you know, the whole and
In favor of Obama.
In favor of Obama. And so Romney has no choice. He has got to get people that like Obama to vote for him.
Why do you think that Mitt Romney had such a hard time sort of connecting with people? Because in primary after primary, I think there were only a couple where he got over 50%. Most of the time, most of the voters who voted for somebody other than Mitt Romney. There's no question there's a huge divide in the Republican Party, and Romney has to find a way to get those people on the right side of his party to at least, have some enthusiasm for him. But he seemed to have he seemed to have a difficult time finding a way, crafting a message to them. Why do you think that was, John?
I think there's two parts of that. One, the Republican primary electorate in almost every state is heavily driven by social conservatives. Those people are not irrational to have mistrust of Mitt Romney. He did not govern as a social conservative in Massachusetts. You'd almost have to say, what's wrong with you if you really do have full confidence in somebody who didn't, just as recently as a few years ago, share your positions? So that's very, I think, straightforward. The other part of connection, and this does get a little impressionistic, but I think Mitt Romney does have trouble connecting with people he doesn't know well. There was this interesting story in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. In Massachusetts, he never learned the names of a lot of the legislators that he was working with. There'd be powerful people in the Massachusetts legislature. Oh, hello, Governor. And he'd say hi, but he wouldn't say their name. He wouldn't say, hi, Bob. He'd say hi. And I was like, that guy doesn't know my name, even though I've met him a dozen times or 24 times, and I'm pretty important. Look, that's not good as a politician. I don't think that Mitt Romney has he's obviously a very intelligent man. I don't think he has the sort of emotional intelligence of a great politician like Bill Clinton.
Nor does Barack Obama.
I would say that's also true. They both have like a high degree of analytical sort of prowess, but they don't, I think, connect at that impressionistic level. Mitt Romney is just a data-driven guy. I was reading something recently. His son was quoted and about when Mitt Romney comes over to the house, he says, that tree. I think that tree needs to come down. It looks like it's not. It's a little sick. And, starts coming up with the to-do list for the house. That's just what he does. He was a success, a big success at Bain Capital, but precisely because he had this very analytical approach. Let's put on the X and the Y coordinates and figure out a plan. So a PowerPoint.
But Bob, I got another. I mean, I don't disagree with all those things, and I think it is amazing stylistically. Obama and Romney would have worked really well together at Bain. I mean, I think Romney would have hired Obama, that they would have been, they're essentially both PowerPoint guys. But in politics, you need a story to tell. And I've always gotten the sense with Romney, you say he lacks that emotional, and there's no doubt, compared to Bill Clinton, we all do, right? We all lack that sort of emotional IQ but I think there are stories that Mitt Romney could tell, but he's afraid to tell them. So this is a man who's very deeply committed to his faith.
What do you mean he's afraid to tell?
I think, I say that he's got he could have three different stories to tell if you're Mitt Romney. Good stories to tell. If this were politician X, one story would be the competent businessman. One story would be the man of deep conviction and deep faith. And one story would be as governor of Massachusetts. Well, here he is in this unique position. Can't talk about faith because of the evangelical suspicion about Mormonism. This is a major part of his life, mind you. Okay, a good 14, 15 years as head of the Mormon church in Boston, essentially. They call them the presidents. This is where he did emotionally connect to people. Can't tell those stories. He's trying to a little bit, but struggles. Can't talk about his record in Massachusetts because
he was a moderate.
He was a moderate, and by the way,
the question I have is what's wrong with being moderate?
And then the third, but not in this primary. Not in this primary. You clearly don't have to worry about cable TV ratings. And the third story, the competent businessman, was the narrative they wanted to tell, and then remember the whole Bain Capital and Gingrich went after it, and I don't think he has been shell-shocked. And then everybody's been making the Kerry comparisons, and I think that there's some to be there. But he strikes me as where Al Gore was at this point in time. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He's taking advice from everybody, down to, okay, I'll wear jeans and no tie because I've got somebody. And Al Gore had the earth tones and had Naomi Wolf on line 2. And I think I agree with, we all know he can't connect, but I think he's holding himself back because of these narratives.
Bob, you made the point, and it's a good one, that President Obama is not particularly good at the handshaking and the backslapping either. He's a little bit better at it than Mitt Romney.
He's a law professor.
But he's a law professor. He's an academic. And actually, in 2008, I covered Obama on the campaign trail, and this would happen quite often, and it's starting to happen again, which is he gives a speech in an auditorium where everybody's standing up and they've been there for hours. Inevitably, in the first 15 minutes, somebody faints. And the reaction of President Obama, you'll see it probably next time you turn on MSNBC. The reaction from President Obama is one that I know in 2008 and I assume in 2012 makes his aides cringe, which is, she'll be fine, no big deal, it's no big deal, she'll be And in fact,
Bill Clinton would have given mouth to mouth.
Depends what only if she had blonde hair.
He would have been on it. And in fact, he would in 2008. And even currently today, he expresses irritation that the people come to hear him haven't
Had something to drink.
had enough to drink,
Aren't hydrated enough.
These are, by the way, usually people of slightly advanced years that are fainting. And there is an empathy gap there as well. Now, I've asked Obama aides, how come President Obama is always 20 points ahead of Mitt Romney on this issue of cares about people like you, when he is just as bad sometimes in front of an audience about this sort of thing. He's not, you know this, he doesn't have the cocktail parties. He doesn't like us.
Nope.
He might like some of you, but and then the reason is because A, because of his policies, and B, because of his personal story. Voters just assigned to him an empathy that he doesn't necessarily
But it goes
have.
to he had a story to tell.
He had a story to tell, right, absolutely.
Nora, what do you think the main issue will be come November as we start looking back on the campaign? What do you think will be the issue that decided?
Well, the economy and jobs is still the number one issue, and whether people think that this president has done enough to improve the state of the economy, and whether they should elect him for another 4 years and that he'll continue the jobs picture. So unemployment is dipped to 8.2%. Whether it will remain steady, I think the Federal Reserve has said it will be somewhere between 8.2 and 8.5%. The trajectory, if it were continue to drop, would help the president continue to make his case that what he's done since he's been in office has helped that picture. And then I think just the general feeling of the electorate on that particular issue. I also think, too, one of the strongest arguments that the Republican Party could make against President Obama and a Democratic president is the issue of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, which is that President Obama, his signature legislative piece of work was a piece of legislation that imposes what many say is a burdensome federal mandate on individuals and employers, that they get health care or pay for health care. And yet the person President Obama is going to be running against, Mitt Romney, was essentially the godfather, as the Democrats like to say, of such a particular policy, the individual mandate as they had in Massachusetts. So that issue in some ways becomes neutralized when it's an issue that I think energizes a large part of the Republican base who believes that that was a burdensome mandate for a liberal to make a liberal president who wants to grow the size of government. Except that argument is a difficult one now for Mitt Romney to make, it seems like. And instead, Mitt Romney is now on the defensive, defending, continuing tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. I mean, they've placed him in a box that makes him very difficult to wedge an issue against President Obama that I think excites Republican voters.
Do you all think that anybody in America knows what's in the health care legislation? To me, I've been in Washington for a long time, and I've never seen an issue or a bill, and it's 2,000 some odd pages long. I've not run into anybody that seems to have a grip on what's in the thing.
I think a lot of Americans have a great idea about what's in it, because either you don't have health insurance and you want health insurance, you're a parent who has a child who, once they got out of college, wasn't able to get health insurance on their own, didn't have a job, now they can. So that's one of the positive things that's in the president's Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. You can stay on your parents' insurance till you're 26. And I think most employers in this country know what it is, because it will force them to pay for every single one of their employees' insurance. And then every individual, if you're an individual who does not have health care, you will be fined for not having health care. I mean, the story has really not been told on the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. And then just another interesting thing, we all hopefully learned a lot about it when this debate over contraception, right? I mean, here's one of the very interesting things about, and I spent a lot of time reporting on this, the Affordable Care Act mandates that all insurance companies cover preventative care. They will cover men's preventative care for colorectal screening, for all kinds of different screenings. For children, all immunizations, no copay, must be paid for by your insurance company, as well as autism screening. And it will also include, for the first time, women's preventative care, which were not mandated. So mammograms, other kinds of cancer screenings that are particular to women, and then also contraception. And that's why it became such a big furor, is because it will now be mandated that contraception is a preventative care that must be covered by insurance policies. And then the president gave an exemption to churches, but not all religious institutions, and that's why this big furor kind of erupted. But it should cause people to sort of look into that.
But he has
But
kind
Bob,
of walked
the
that
reason
back.
why most people don't know what it is, because most people aren't affected by it. And I think that has always been, and in fact, I had plenty of
Only
Democratic...
people who have insurance, Chuck. How can you
That's
say that most people are not affected, but every single American
No.
will
I'm
be
not saying they're
affected
not
by it?
going to get affected by the bill.
Yeah.
They don't...
Your premiums, if you listen to
No,
our
no, no,
podcast,
I
your
understand.
premiums will go
I
up,
hear
and
you.
you pay for
No,
your
no,
health
no.
insurance because everybody, or you can take the opposite side, which is that premiums will go down, whichever side you believe, because everybody will now be insured. It will affect everybody.
My point is, the people most concerned about this issue of health insurance were people that didn't have it or are afraid that they were going to lose it. That was not a majority of Americans. So a majority of Americans, all they hear is thinking, well, I kind of like my health care, why are you changing it? And I think that's where the political problems entered in. I'm not disagreeing.
I disagree with you. I actually don't think most people like their health care. I mean,
But they don't want
can I
someone
get a
else
raise? Who likes their health care? I mean, I do think I think it is a huge issue, and Obama tried to tap into what is a deep anger in this country over health care in this country. Either it's too expensive, you can't get it, you can't get what you want, you don't like the kind of doctor. But he came out with a bill that imposes a mandate on individuals and employers, because that's the only way they could get everybody covered to address the cost problem.
The political mistake they made was trying to get universal coverage.
Right, but we're not going to have that debate
Because the issue was
over
insurance
this.
reform.
Yeah, but we're not going to have that debate over health care because Romney doesn't want to have that debate.
What do you guys on this side, think is going to be the issue that decides this thing?
She's used to be on cable. She's used to this.
I think the well, if it's up to the president, it will be about economic fairness. I don't know that that's going to work, but their attempt is to their calculation is if Obama wins a vast majority of women voters, he beat John McCain with women voters by 13 points. They think that they can do even better against Romney because of this contraception issue and some of the other issues. So if they do that, if they clobber him with Latinos, which Romney was arguably the most conservative person on the stage on the immigration issue, and they rally enough youth, they think they can squeak it out. They think they can win. And so you're going to hear a lot about the DREAM Act and a lot about economic fairness and a lot about contraception and a lot about a vision for the future to appeal to these different groups. Romney is going to say, as Norah points out, the most important issue to voters is jobs in the economy, and Romney's going to say, it's not working. You can talk about the Buffett rule all you want. I'm not sure how many people here follow the Buffett rule, but this is the proposal that all Americans, regardless of how they make their money, pay at least 30% in taxes. As Chuck pointed out, 13.9% is the tax rate Mitt Romney paid in 2010 because most of his money was from investments which have a lower tax rate. As has been pointed out, Barack Obama can have 100 rallies about the Buffett rule. That's not going to create one job, not one. And I think that that is going to be a more resonant and potent message than the Obama campaign thinks it will.
John, there's no question right now there is a gender gap here. Right. I mean, I was just looking at the latest it's a Washington Post poll on women's issues. Obama leads Romney 53 to 34%.
Yeah.
Can Romney change that? What does he have to do to change that?
I think get his wife out there, who's a lot more better, effective.
Well, you know, Ruth Marcus said in the Washington Post today, said he's going to have to do more than outsource it to his wife. That
right.
he's got to get out there and talk to women about issues that are important to them. I mean,
the little bit of the joke was that when Mitt Romney was asked recently, last week I believe it was in Washington, about the fact that there is such a huge gender gap. I think it was 18 points or something like that. It was 18 in the swing states, in the key swing states. Mitt Romney said, "Well, I understand. You know, traditionally Republicans have had a gender gap. That is true." He said, "But I have my wife to inform me about women's issues," which a lot of people kind of scrutinized that comment, saying, "Why does he need his wife to tell him about women's issues?" So he was mocked by Ruth Marcus in the.
Didn't help that 2 days later, Paul Ryan compared him to Ward Cleaver, by the way.
The 2010 election, which Republicans had a great victory in, obscured for many of them the deep problems that the Republican Party has. They figured, hey, like, whatever, we figured it out. People hate Obama so much, we're going to ride that to victory. Well, it's now clear that the 2010 formula is not going to work in 2012, and the Republican Party is, to too much a degree, like the party of old white guys. I've got nothing against old white guys, like hopefully will be one myself in due course. But in a country that's becoming more diverse, particularly with Hispanics, an electorate that's becoming younger, and with this enormous gender gap, like that is a big problem. The Republican brand long term, whatever happens to Mitt Romney this fall, the Republican brand is in need of a serious overhaul.
The way he's going to try to combat this, and I don't know if it will be successful, but the way he's going to try to combat this, and you've seen this week, is Mitt Romney's been talking about how many women have lost their jobs under President Obama, and how disproportionately the number of those who have lost their jobs in the last, since January '09, have been women. He did an event today at a woman-owned small business in Connecticut. He did one yesterday at a woman that owns business in Delaware. We'll see if it works. That's how he's trying to flip the war on women thing on its head.
Where is the election going to be decided? What will be the key battleground states this year?
Chuck's
well, I think the 5 closest states are going to be Ohio, Florida, Colorado, Nevada, and Virginia. I mean, I think right now those are the 5 pure swing states. And then you have, maybe a North Carolina's in there, maybe a Wisconsin, and that, you have, right now the Romney job is to expand the map, try to get the Midwest more in play, try to get Michigan, Wisconsin more in play. And the Obama campaign is trying to get North Carolina in play. And this goes to this issue on Latinos. And if they don't fix this Latino problem, then the Republicans have a map problem, because suddenly you cede the entire West to Obama. And I say the entire West is Colorado. And look, the Romney folks think they can put New Mexico in play too. I don't think so, but you throw Colorado and Nevada with the large Hispanic populations there, and you put, by the way, 2 Senate races in 2010 that Democrats pulled out largely because of overperformance among Latinos and bad Republican candidates, but the Latino thing mattered. You put that map there, then Obama can win without either Ohio and Florida. And that's the big problem that Romney has right now.
And can I just back up just for a minute? And Chuck is the expert on all of these states and where they are now. You have to look at how Obama won in 2008. He obliterated the traditional electoral map. I mean, he clobbered John McCain. It was 7 points. It was the largest margin of victory for a Democrat since 1964, when LBJ beat Barry Goldwater. I mean, the traditional red and blue map, Obama obliterated that. He won by 365 electoral votes. You only need 270 electoral votes to win. So Obama could lose Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, Indiana, and still win by 35 electoral votes. Obama, all he has to do is keep the map that Kerry had and just win Florida. I mean, so even though everything's changed now and you reset it certainly every election, I just think it's worth noting when you go back and look at what Obama won in 2008, it was a remarkable map. And he faced a candidate in John McCain and Sarah Palin, so everything's reset now. But they did a lot of groundwork in states, Virginia, Indiana, North Carolina, states that had not gone Democratic in a very long time. And the reason they won in those states is because they turned out younger voters, they found African-American voters, they worked the particular voters in that state where the demographics had changed, and they drove up turnout in those particular states. And so that's why they talk about a state like Arizona, for instance, now, which probably will not.
They have a money problem now.
So if those are the 5 states, will Romney's vice presidential running mate come from one of those 5 states? What do you all think? Who do you think it'll be? Just give us a guess.
People really actually seldom pick, you know this better than I do, so I'll tell to them. People seldom actually pick candidates based on where they're from. I mean, if you look at it, Dick Cheney from Wyoming.
Sarah Palin from
Sarah
Alaska.
Palin from
Joe Biden in those 3 electoral votes in
Joe
Delaware.
Biden in Delaware, John Edwards from North Carolina. They really seldom do. It usually has more to do with what their weaknesses are as a candidate and how that person can make up for those weaknesses. Al Gore needed to distance himself from Bill Clinton, so he picked Clinton's chief Democratic critic in the Senate, who almost had called for Bill Clinton's resignation from the Senate floor, Joe Lieberman. Barack Obama needed, as George W. Bush needed, a seasoned statesman to be next to him. I think that I would not be surprised if you see a woman, because Mitt Romney is doing so horribly right now among women voters, and the Republicans have an okay bench when it comes to potential women vice presidential candidates.
Who?
Yeah, who?
Who's this okay bench? There's so few Republican elected women.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I think in 4 years we're going to talk about Kelly Ayotte, or in 4 years we're going to talk about Susana Martinez, and in 4 years, I think there's too many of the rising star women Republicans they're going to, particularly a guy who works with PowerPoint at Bain, is going to say, wait a minute, we tried somebody who was only in office for 14 months when we picked her.
But Kelly Ayotte is no Sarah Palin.
I agree, and I think Kelly Ayotte is going to be vetted, and I think she's going to be in the final 3 for this very
Who do you
Kelly
think?
Ayotte is
who
a
are the
senator from
final
New
3?
Hampshire, by the way.
She's New Hampshire. My final 3 would be Paul Ryan, Rob Portman, and Kelly Ayotte. That's who I think will be there. That's my. If I were to say, like, when we report that the final 3 that got vetted, that's who I'd throw out today.
I would just add one thing.
These guys are all hedging bets.
To what Jake said.
Make a prediction. It's going to be Rob Portman of Ohio.
You think?
Predictions are like stocks, okay?
You think it's going to be Bush's budget director?
You have to
You
buy.
think Bush's
You
budget
really
director?
think Mitt Romney's going to pick Bush's budget
I'm with
director?
Jake. I don't buy it because of the Bush baggage. I'm with you.
And he's a nice guy and a Dartmouth grad.
I understand. You're just wrong, though.
One of the smartest guys in the Senate, despite the Dartmouth stuff.
I would just want to, one thing to what Jake said, I think that sometimes presidents do pick people based on where they're from. And I would just cite Lyndon Johnson.
That's the last time.
Who was picked by Jack Kennedy. And Jack Kennedy, I think, would not have won that election.
Sure.
Had it not been for Lyndon.
But as I'm sure you know from reading the Robert Caro excerpt in The New Yorker, he was potentially going to be dropped from the ticket in 1964. I hope it's not heresy to say that, but Lyndon Johnson might have been dropped from the ticket. But yes, of course, it has happened historically.
By the way, Robert Caro, it took him 4 volumes to get to the Johnson presidency. God love him.
So let me ask you all this. I'll tell you what we want to do. We want to go to questions from the audience next, but while we're talking about this, as you're thinking, there's a microphone at the front here. If you'd like to ask a question, come on down. While you're coming on down, I will ask the panel here, does anybody here think that Barack Obama might pick another running mate this time?
No.
No way.
Nobody does. If he did, who would it be?
It would be a sign of weakness, by the way, to do it. I think it would only send the message of weakness.
And disloyalty.
Yeah. I think there's no good politics out of it.
No Hillary.
I think the more likely scenario is that, and it will never happen, but that Joe Biden would leave after several years and Hillary would come in as vice president at the tail end of the Obama administration to set her up.
That's a good one.
To set her up so that she could run for president as vice president.
That should be planted in Bob Woodward's next book, and he can, say,
Yeah.
somebody
But Joe Biden would never, ever give up the job.
We have a question from the audience.
I watch and I follow this really close, and I always hear about the deficit and the amount of spending we're doing, and Obama's involved and everything else. Well, this deficit, in my opinion, has grown over many, many presidents.
I think you're right.
But the very people that voted for these deficits, the congressmen and the senators, are now pointing fingers at this president or at the next president.
Okay.
I would like you people, as representatives of us, asking questions. Ask them how they vote. When some guy comes up and says, this deficit's out of shape because of the war, did you vote for the war? You're a congressman, you're a senator, how did you vote? And I would just like to have somebody nail them to the wall and make them answer right up front.
All right. Very good point. All right. Next question.
It's all right.
Mine's not as tense as that. I was thinking, you were talking about Romney's weaknesses earlier. Do you think having such a fierce primary and having Santorum really being someone from his own party, but really going against Romney and really pointing out his weaknesses, do you think that's starting him way farther behind than a normal primary would?
Who would like to answer?
Yeah, I think not only Santorum, but Newt Gingrich, really, and a lot of the super PACs. Ron Paul's super PAC didn't really touch Romney much, did it?
They never touched Romney.
But Newt Gingrich's super PAC really went after him very hard. Yeah, I think that drove up his negatives, and I think that's going to change. I mean, through the natural course of events, Romney's positives will go up. You'll see a lot more positive ads, and there's also, I think, the media. There's going to be like a media narrative shift where the media starts taking him. You'll see more positive profiles of Romney, I think.
But you could argue that because of the challenge from Santorum and Gingrich, that Romney took positions further to the right than he would have liked to, that he's now on record of taking. I mean, on the issue, for instance, of immigration, I mean, he was to the right of Governor Perry and other people in those debates.
Every single person up there.
What?
Every single person on stage.
Every single other person on stage.
He always made him.
But he did that in 2008 too.
That was the only issue. He had an ideological problem and he knew it, so he picked an issue where he could stake out conservative ground that he thought was defensible from his days as Massachusetts governor. And I do think that it's going to bite him. Like at the end, when you have this Western sweep and we see a political map that shows Republicans winning Florida and Ohio and losing the presidency, and they're going to be like, how the heck did that happen? It'll be Hispanics.
And if I could just, one other point on that is just, at the time that Rick Perry was ahead in the polls, I remember talking to a senior Obama person who was talking about how this was going to change the map, because Rick Perry was going to be able to win Latino voters, not a majority of them, but far more than Mitt Romney was going to be able to, and that was going to change how they were going to compete in Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, I think that I can't say that they would have rather faced Mitt Romney than Rick Perry.
I don't think so either. I don't. It's never been as easy as people think.
I think they feel good about the fact that they're facing somebody who was the farthest on the right on that issue.
Next question.
Thank you. There's been a lot of voter suppression going on. There was a story of an 84-year-old lady who voted in every election, and they told her she couldn't vote unless she could go dig up her marriage license from the 1800s or whatever. And I wonder if you think it's going to affect the election.
Who'd like to take that?
Well, look, I'll just say this. I do think all these laws are it is one of these things where the stories on both sides always feel to me a little over the top, right? These voter laws, these ID laws, are a solution in search of a problem, right? We don't have this rampant problem. However, you sit there and say, you know, to me, the compromise is, okay, everybody under 65 ought to show an ID or something like that. I mean, to me, it is weird to me that you don't have a photo. How do you operate in society these days? I do understand that people over 80, there are plenty of people over 80 that don't have photo ID. So it is sort of one of those, you sit there and you say, when you hear the complaints, I can't, well, how do you operate through life without a photo ID either? You know, so to me, it's a solution in search of a problem. At the same time, there should be some sort of, like I said, a real middle ground here. You should have to prove that you live where you live in some form or another.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you how you all feel about the effect of Norquist on the election, on Congress, and on the country in general.
Grover, you heard of Grover Norquist?
You were talking about Grover Norquist?
Yes.
Grover Norquist is the head of, what's the name of his outfit?
Americans for Tax Reform.
And he goes around and gets people to sign a pledge that says, I pledge that if elected, I will never raise taxes or something of that nature. Would anybody like to talk about that? I mean, I think he is a force. I mean, I would say, I think he's a major force. I think candidates have to be very careful. I mean, when I vote for somebody, I want a general idea what their principles are and what they stand for. But I also expect them to be people of good judgment. And I think one of the problems that we have now in Washington, what has happened now, we have a Congress that is basically impotent. It can't do anything. The Congress last year, even when there were issues that they wanted, that people on both sides wanted to pass, they were so locked into their positions that they still couldn't get it done. The Congress last year managed to go through an entire session without doing anything of any significance whatsoever because they have lost the ability to compromise. What's different now than how it used to be is that in order to raise enough money to get elected, you have to sign off with so many interest groups before you get to Washington that once you get there, you can't compromise. You can't move an inch to the right or an inch to the left. And so we have what we have, this total and ongoing gridlock. So in that sense, I mean, I know Grover, and I mean, I think he's a good, loyal, patriotic American, but I don't think that's particularly helpful myself.
And it's going to come up because at the end of this year, there has to be tax reform. There's the expiration of the Bush tax cuts.
The worst 6 weeks of all of our lives.
It's going to be
the election will end, and all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, Congress now operates like teenagers do before an exam, which is cramming for the last 24 hours and still haven't finished its work before they've got to take the exam. And this is going to come up as the Bush tax cuts expire. There's got to be some sort of consensus on this because it doesn't just affect the wealthiest Americans, it also affects middle-class Americans. And if President Obama is elected, he said he wants to keep those for middle-class Americans. And even if Romney's elected, he wants to keep all of the Bush tax cuts. So there's going to have to be some sort of tax debate at the end of this year. And you have a real issue. There's a lot of meaningful people in Congress who say, yeah, let's scrap the whole code. Let's make it fair. Let's make it flatter. Let's take out a lot of these loopholes and deductions. But it will inevitably, in some ways, you could cast it as raising some taxes on people. And will that scare individuals who've signed the pledge?
I mean, to me, the whole idea that compromise has become a dirty word. I just don't think that's helpful to a democratic society.
Yeah, and I just think it's also worth noting too, Grover, who is a patriotic American, is funded by, he does not reveal who is funded, by people who want to keep certain tax loopholes in the tax code.
Which is
because it
certainly
benefits
legitimate.
their corporate interests. Yeah.
Next question. Thank you, ma'am.
I have two questions that are both related in some sense to young voters and the increasing young voter base. The first one is, what impact do you think the Occupy movement will have on the election? Maybe not directly as the Occupy movement, but in terms of the sentiment that they carry.
Okay. Who'd like to talk about The Occupy movement.
Yeah.
What
I don't think
impact
the
will it have?
Occupy movement, yeah, the way you framed it is, I would agree with. Not so much the Occupy movement in the technical sense, but I do think we're seeing a shift in politics, an ideological shift that is raising issues of economic fairness and putting them in mainstream debate in a way that they haven't been for a couple of generations.
The Occupy movement wanted to be a force. They should do what the Tea Party movement did and vote.
Okay. The second question that I had is, it's something you all touched on earlier about how the Republican Party is sort of looking for something to energize the younger voters, with whom I can't remember who mentioned that they had a disconnect with. Ron Paul, running on a Republican ticket, has a lot of support from young voters. Do you think that the ideological stance of the Republican Party is going to shift away from conservatism as we know it today towards a more libertarian, Ron Paulish stance?
My general sense is no, but what would you?
No, I mean, I think you're seeing, though, that you're certainly seeing on some social issues, younger Republicans who basically don't want to, don't throw that gay rights, talk about gay marriage and you try to have a wedge issue on that. I got no problems with that and all this. So you're hearing more and more on young, but actually, if you look at the young registration numbers, and part of this has been Paul, and the question is, I do wonder what happens in the fall on this. But 4 years ago, Democrats had this large registration advantage among younger voters. They still have an advantage in the new voters, but it's down. The gap between the DNR is down. Actually, the faster rise is independent, registering as neither party, registering as neither party. So I do think
young people.
Among young folks, I think some of that is the Paul effect, and some of that is a little bit of, I think, disenchantment about the economy. Let's not forget, I think it's younger voters that are struggling the most to find a job.
We, just to show we're modern and we're right on the cutting edge, we did invite people to send us questions by Twitter. So we want to ask Lauren Gallipo, one of our Washington, is going to be part of our Washington semester program amongst the next group, has been keeping up. What are they asking about?
Okay, Tyler Press, who is a Schieffer School student, asked on Twitter, why is the GOP so far behind the curve on utilizing social media in rallying younger voters? Is it too late for them to catch up?
Are they? Do we think they are or aren't? I don't know.
I don't think they're behind the curve in using social media to target media. And to
Yes. Jake and I think all three of us can attest to that. We're both, all three of us are big tweeters.
I think there's actually an interesting split, which is that actually the Republicans on the House side have actually, a lot of the younger staffers in the Republicans have been the most aggressive with social media. So in Congress, the Republicans have been a bit stronger in terms of using social media to their advantage. I don't know that anybody's done a real analysis on the presidential.
The Ron Paul campaign has been fantastic at using social media.
Yeah, but Ron
Absolutely
Paul.
great.
But this stuff ebbs, by the way. Every election cycle, one party catches up to the other. In 1988, there's a great story somebody told me, when they were selling the hotline. In fact, Democratic Party didn't even have a fax machine, but the Republican Party had everything. And, it was because the they were ahead on technology in 92. I mean, this is one of those things that goes back and forth. Bush was so far ahead of the Democratic Party in 2004. Well, the Obama folks sort of emulated it and did it better. And now the Romney folks are trying to do what Bush did and overlay some of this stuff of social media on it. So this stuff, it always sort of, one party always has the advantage, but it's only for a short time.
Give us another one.
Okay, Sharon Eblin on Facebook wrote, why don't media outlets report that a politician's statement is false when it is obviously false? Doesn't the media disserve the public when it treats obvious falsehoods presented as legitimate political discourse?
Well, I got to say, I thought we did. I mean...
The question is false.
This is where, the real problem is facts are subjective. That's the problem. In politics, facts are more subjective than I think than you realize. First of all, you have a lot more people that view, when they watch politics, they watch and consume it through their own prism. They don't consume it objectively. They consume it subjectively. Second is, there's a great little fact here. There's this fact about that Romney's throwing around. 92% of job losses have been women since Obama took office. 90% of job losses. And they found a mathematical equation that makes that technically true. But it actually doesn't make, you could literally move the needle a month, and then you could say that President Obama has seen a 3,000% increase in job creation for women. The thing is, it's ridiculous math on both sides. So the problem is, you sit there and say, somebody will say, well, that's factually incorrect. And the Romney campaign will say, no, it is factually correct if you look at it and say, here's the number of job losses since January of 2009 among all people, and here's the number of job losses among women since January of 2009. Now, it doesn't factor in all these other things. So I think that's the challenge, is and so what we do in politics, you say, well, wait a minute, isn't your math this way? And then, so it becomes where the facts are a little more subjective than I think the average viewer believes that they are.
But, you know, I mean, we don't publish things as journalists unless we think they're true. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't come on Face the Nation and make an assertion that may not be true, and I would, you know, when I think it's not true, I challenge them on that. Sometimes it gets by me, sometimes it doesn't. But the other thing you want to remember is from the standpoint of political advertising, when a candidate goes to a television station and buys an ad, a political ad, the station cannot edit it, you know, because under free speech, a person's allowed to say whatever they wish to say. So when you see something that somebody's paid to put on television, the law states that, you know, you have to let them say it. The other guy can come back and say it's false, but that you can't turn it down just because it might be false. Let's go back to the audience here.
Thanks for coming to Fort Worth. In January of '84, there were polls showing Walter Mondale beating Ronald Reagan, and the unemployment rate went from about 9% to about 7.2%. And the view was the economy was getting better from when Jimmy Carter had become president. What do you think the odds are of President Obama winning a landslide like President Reagan did, given the same kind of glide slope?
I don't think it's going to be a landslide. I would just say that. But go ahead, Norah.
Right,
whether he wins or not, I don't think either guy is going to get a landslide.
And remember that Reagan at the end there was experiencing GDP growth. It was like 6, 7, 8%. I mean, GDP growth is between 2, 2.5, 3%. So we're not going to have a precipitous drop in the unemployment rate the way that Reagan benefited from.
To get a landslide in modern politics, you need the party you defeat to have a demoralized base as well, I think. And I can't imagine a scenario where the Republican base is demoralized that they don't show up. So, and I can't imagine a scenario where the Democratic base somehow is. I just think that we're dealing with high floors. I thought Jake put it really well when he said, look, we know what the floor and ceiling is for Barack Obama and the Republican Party. It's 2008.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry to focus so much attention on Ron Paul. I know you've gotten a lot of questions about him, but I'm 18 and I'm young, and I would never have associated myself as a Republican or conservative, but Ron Paul got me interested with a lot of things that he had to say. And I don't know if I would have voted for him, but I know that if he ran as a third-party candidate, he would get a lot of votes from people just like me that I can name and that I know. And I don't know.
What do you like about him?
What I like about him? I like the fact that he is willing to be open socially on things that anyone else who has, you know, a bit of an understanding about the. Sorry, I sound like an idiot right now. I don't know why I'm nervous, but anyway, no, the fact that he could be honest about the fact that the Republican Party was focusing too much on social issues that didn't have very little to do with problems that we're actually facing today, was an honesty that I hadn't seen in a candidate before. Not that I've seen a lot of candidates, but I guess he just seems honest to me in a way that I didn't see in other people. And
well, I think that's certainly a legitimate reason to like somebody. I mean, I really do.
But anyway, my point would be, do you see there being a chance of him running as a third-party candidate or anyone else running as a third-party candidate that could affect this election?
Well, I'm going to let Chuck and John, what do you guys think? Do you think there's a chance that he will? See, that thread has been hanging out there.
There's a chance. I just have a different hunch than you do, that if he did run, he would be like at Ralph Nader-like levels of 1-2%. Now, that Ralph Nader's 1 or 2% did have kind of an effect in 2000. But the reason I think that is I do think we're at this moment in politics where people very much will respond in the moment to something that they like. Something somebody says that they like. Yeah, you go. I agree with that. Herman Cain had that. A number, Sarah Palin has that. Yeah, you go. That's exactly right. And Ron Paul has that with a large number of people who, when they actually go to cast a vote, people don't cast that vote on the basis of like, I kind of like the message that person's sending. They're, in my experience, very serious about casting their vote, and they only cast it for people who they think have a legitimate chance to be president and who actually could do the job. Look, here's truth for you. Look, nobody among Ron Paul's supporters, I would even venture, actually thinks that it would be a good idea for the kind of 77-year-old guy with a sort of wandering attention span and all kinds of views way out of the mainstream. Look, that would be really a good idea to put him in the Oval Office. Even Ron Paul doesn't think that, right? So it's just not going to happen. On a third-party candidate, I believe that there's so much disaffection in politics right now. You've got a radicalized center. Usually in politics, it's the ideological extremes who are radicalized. That's why they're on the extreme. The middle usually is kind of sedate. That's why they're middle. Right now, you've got such disaffection across the spectrum that if there were a compelling third-party candidate, I believe that person could have a major effect. If Ross Perot, after having established himself as a little kind of off the deep end in 1992, was able to get 19% of the vote, this to me seems like a much more radicalized and disaffected environment than 92. So all we need is a candidate. And
that's the problem. That's the problem right there. There's no obvious. Right.
But can I just throw this out there? Why doesn't in some way Mitt Romney end up appealing to some of those voters if he ends up not talking at all about social issues? It's certainly not in his bones to want to rail on social issues, and instead he just talks about fiscal issues. Why then doesn't he end up appealing to some of those voters? I mean, he is the New England liberal,
right? But he's
the
seen
moderate
as a thoroughly
Republican.
conventional politician, and people are upset with politics as usual.
But I always thought that Ron Paul loves Ayn Rand. I always thought that Mitt Romney was like a character from The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, and that there would be
in a bad way, not in a good way.
He's Reardon, actually.
Not in a, well, I guess it depends on your point of view. The reason I don't think Ron Paul will run
Hank Reardon, hello.
The reason I don't think Ron Paul will run as a third-party candidate is because of Rand Paul, his son, the senator from Kentucky, who I think he has very high hopes for him actually someday becoming the Republican presidential nominee. And for him to leave the Republican Party would hurt Rand, and I think he loves his son, and I think he wants
We're
that
kind
to
of
happen.
coming to the end here. You were here first. I'll hear from you, and that'll be.
Yeah, we're concluding a primary process finally that maybe has seen an unprecedented number of candidates meteorically rise to frontrunner and then crash and burn the following week. What's the attribution? Is it a weak candidate field, dissatisfaction with Romney, short news cycle? Why has the Republican primary process produced this unprecedented?
I think it's all Mitt Romney. I think this is unique to Mitt Romney.
I think there was a large segment in the Republican Party in the beginning that didn't like Mitt Romney, and I think there's still that segment there. And there were the various anybody but Romney candidates, and what would happen is each time one of them would rise to the front, then Romney would dump these negative ads, just this barrage of negative ads, and take them down, and then somebody else would come, all except Rick Perry. I mean, Rick Perry produced his own negative ads. It was.
He's still the
But I mean,
governor of
I
this
think
state, right?
basically that's.
He's going to
that's
run
what it
again
was.
too, isn't he?
I have no information on that. But I think that's basically what it was.
But I think also, Bob, and
Yeah, go ahead.
you know this better than I, but there also becomes an opportunity when a candidate rises for that candidate to grow into that position and become something bigger than he or she has been before. And every single one of these people, Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, failed. They had an opportunity. Maybe ultimately they couldn't have beaten Mitt Romney, but they had an opportunity to become something bigger, and they just didn't have it in them. That's what I think.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to know what you thought, how influential you think super PACs will be during a general election, and if you think they're here to stay.
That's a very good question, and I'd like to hear the panel, because that's the one thing that is so different this time around, and I really do think has had a major impact. Jake, what do you think about the impact of the super PAC?
I think they're going to be huge. I think it's going to be an unbelievable amount of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think probably Republican super PACs will be in greater abundance than Democratic super PACs. And as to what happens with them, it depends on who wins in November and how they feel about, and including the Congress, and how they feel about super PACs.
Well, we also saw, I mean, the fact that this primary went on so long, part of the reason for that was the
only reason for it.
The super PACs. I mean, Newt Gingrich could have lasted.
Candidates don't drop out because they feel like they, you know, well, this is a good time for me to drop out. Candidates drop out because they run out of money.
Yeah.
And they can't afford a plane ticket to Iowa or wherever. And both Foster Freeze with Mr. Santorum and Sheldon Adelson with Mr. Gingrich put that off by funding millions and millions of dollars of ads.
And also, I believe the number is there were $60 million spent in super PACs during the Republican primary. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money that was spent largely on behalf of Mitt Romney to carpet bomb some of those that were running against him. The Republican and Republican-affiliated groups and supporters of Mitt Romney has promised to spend in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So far, we've seen that the Democrats have not been able to organize and sort of contribute to their own super PACs in that regard. I think they'll be a huge factor, but I also think it's important to note that I do believe that the FEC does give in the final month or so of the campaigns get the first slot at buying ads on TV. So there won't be much a heavy influence on those independent groups in the final weeks of the campaign, which is traditionally when a lot of people tend to focus.
Well, I think look at what's going on right now. President Obama's up with TV ads right now, responding to super PAC ads. Mitt Romney's not up attacking him. It's two different groups that are attacking him in 5 or 6 different swing states, and President Obama's the one having to do it because there aren't Democratic super PACs. I think we know that Obama will be outspent. Team Obama will be outspent by Team Romney. Now, that doesn't mean Obama's going to lose. Bush was outspent by Team Kerry in 2004 and was able to win. I think there's going to be something. But I do think the super PACs will be more influential in the fall in the House and Senate races than they will be on the presidential.
Well, we've kind of come to the end of the line here. Before we go, I just want to tell you all how proud we are and how much we appreciate the support that you've given to the Schieffer School of Journalism. We are now doing this symposium once a month in Washington at CSIS. It gets on C-SPAN. We stream it out. We get tremendous reaction from that. But the latest program that I'm most proud of, and the one we're seeing this huge success, is our program, the Schieffer School in Washington, where we bring anywhere from 6 to 8 students from TCU, and they come to Washington. They live there. They do internships at places like Politico and at CBS. I think the last time we had 8, and I believe 4 of them have already been offered real jobs in Washington, and they're going to be coming to Washington after graduation. And all of the students that were part of our last class and the ones who will be coming in the next class are here tonight, and I'd just like for all of them to stand so you can see who they are. We're really proud of them. And I've got to point out one very special one who was our intern at Face the Nation this year, and she was a terrific intern, and she had the added value of she was a singer in my band, and you all know her, Ashley Melnick, Miss Texas of 2011. Ashley, stand up. So we've had a lot of fun. Folks, I hope you all enjoyed it. We love being here, and I hope you'll all come back again next year. Thank you very much. That was great. You were great.